Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Hollow and today I'm happy to be talking more Blue Protocol, the upcoming MMORPG with its very anime-esque visual style, its action combat, and some pretty unique mechanics to go with it. I'm really excited for this game to finally release, and if this is your first time seeing this game, you're certainly in for a treat. I played it in the first closed beta that happened a couple months ago, and the gameplay footage you'll see today is all from my perspective. The game is set to be released in Japan originally, and then will be released globally after that. So while we're waiting, today I'm going to talk about the massive feedback address from the devs that finally released earlier in June. It's an absolute mass of new information that was released, featuring tons of answers to many questions that we were asking, and in general, addressing the varied concerns or feedback from that original closed beta. I personally made a video about my thoughts and experiences playing that beta, so definitely check the video out if you want to learn more about this game and see different elements of it all explained with my own gameplay. Now for this massive wall of text, I figured it'd be best to share the major and most important details and then discuss those. A sort of everything you need to know about the next stage for Blue Protocol, so let's get started. There's all kinds of long-term balancing and content to add and fair player concerns to address now we've had our hands on the game. The devs managed to address some of those major concerns alongside an absolute wall of minor ones too, so let's quickly mention the biggest and most valid in my eyes before we then talk about some of the upcoming additions to the game. I think the most important feedback was in regards to crafting, which is the absolute core of the gameplay loop for Blue Protocol. Players have expressed that crafting was too slow and, well, unrewarding, and I certainly have my own thoughts to talk about after we say these concerns, so let's move on first. Secondly, we have the character customization, which was very limited and simple. Though it had some options, it was ultimately much less than what players were hoping for originally. Next, players expressed concerns about combat, which is really interesting because they said the combat was too difficult, which I completely disagree with. And there was definite and fair concerns about the game lacking enough abilities to make your character feel unique. It's another big aspect of the game that they certainly need to iron out, and some of you guys even said in the comments in previous videos that you were worried about exactly this. There isn't enough abilities, so I definitely want to talk about that too. The elephant in the room for this game is definitely the VFX overload. This one is so spot on. There's just too many special effects occurring at once in one spot to see what's happening. A VFX overload when many players are fighting in one location in the world. You know, this game is centered around, in a big way, world bosses or mini bosses, and I saw this a lot in a short amount of game time. It definitely needs addressing. And lastly, for the major feedback stuff, the boss fights themselves, be it mini bosses or the real deal, were simply too simple. A cluster of players would be stun locking and spamming abilities into any boss really, without real much threat to themselves. Even in solo environments, in the dungeons, they need more dangerous attacks to avoid, with more of a ebb and flow style to the battle. They should be designed with many players attacking at once in mind, in the case of world bosses, which I'm not sure they were. Then we got the many small complaints that are much more simple in their nature, almost subjective whether you'd agree or disagree. Therefore, the game has some important aspects to tackle to appease its current and primary Japanese audience, well before we can expect direct work on global release when that game is ready. It's good to put into perspective and know exactly what it is the game needs to work on so they can address them, and I want to talk about that too. Let's start with the loot and gearing, which is done via the crafting system. In this game, you'll defeat enemies, bosses, and gather nodes to receive materials. And then, when you return to the city, you appraise the materials to reveal what you got. Maybe it's an Imogen essence, a gem, or grasses, hides, whatever you were killing or gathering recently. From here, those items are then transferred to your storage, which you can access magically from anywhere in the city. And you use these items to craft equipment via weapons, armor, Imogen, and upgrade these respectively, once again using the same materials. It's the source for all crafting and trading, and is certainly key to every journey you make out into the world, because as soon as you reach your inventory limit, which happens often when you're grinding, you need to return to the city to appraise and then free up those inventory slots once more. Now at first this system was solid and fun, very satisfying, but when you're knee deep in grinding that last boar horn for your dragon claw weapon like I was, you've no idea if that item you just picked up from that boar you just killed is a boar horn or maybe a hide hide without heading back to the city to appraise and find out, which is annoying in that moment. Endgame, that's going to be even more of a pain because it feels like that inventory is way too small and that appraise system itself is a little too punishing in how it hides what you've gathered. All the nodes look the same as well. There's no visual change whether you're gathering a node, whether you're trying to pick up ore, grass, or whatever until you appraise it. A cool system in concept, but definitely needs refining. Next, that character customization. It's receiving updates and an overhaul. We're expecting to see many more options than what we originally saw in the beta, and on top of that, we're also going to be able to customize specific body parts with more options for each too. Then after your character is made, we'll then have access to a new salon that will provide even more options once you've unlocked them or got the resources required. In line with that though, the outfits we were wearing on our customized characters are very limited in this first beta. I had like 2 to choose between, and I saw like some players in a third outfit after they'd consumed basically everything in the beta, and that was it. And on this, the devs have confirmed that they're adding a ton of outfits to buff out the currently tiny supply, which you'll be able to earn in game or purchase via that cosmetic shop. For some reason, they also mentioned that we're gonna be able to customize our underwear. Woo! Thank you, Japan. This is really important. I'm sure someone's happy about that. Now let's talk about combat, which is centered around that third-person free aim playstyle, which is apparently too hard to some players. It's an action-orientated RPG with no tab targeting. You need to aim your abilities and attacks to actually land your blows. These often feel solid and weighty, with many abilities or chain attacks resulting in staggers or stuns or big powerful hits. The idea behind this playstyle is that it requires a base level of skill to successfully hit and defeat enemies, and in doing so creates a more exciting and involved combat system. On the other hand though, unfortunately, as solid as the core of the game feels, with its limited amount of abilities and even those chain attack combos, which you can use in different ways for different results, well, they result in basically one different attack. I would throw out a basic combo, right, and then I would get either an AoE swing or a straightforward lunge at the end, which does a bit of a crit, and that was basically the two attack chains I had access to. The concept of the attack strings for different purposes is great, but just like everything about this combat from the first beta, it was too simple and there was just not enough depth. Thankfully, we know they're addressing this with more abilities and tuning the current ones at that, but it really does need to come back with the next beta full force to show that they mean it, with lots of new abilities and way more interesting variants on the current ones. I'm excited to see what comes next, given the satisfying nature to what was originally a very simple system, and with how good the animations and abilities look too. I have faith in them on this. A whole other aspect of the combat though is the Imogen, which allows you to summon various beasts to your side temporarily to help you out in battle. They come in many different forms and purposes to show up and give you, say, a powerful buff or provide a healing area for you and your team. There's bad boys who are big and strong, smash your foe for big damage or stun them, or ones that can set areas ablaze for AoE damage like the Firefox. The system was solid, letting you choose a minor and major Imogen summon for whatever your personal preferences were for the upcoming battle. They can be upgraded to increase their power too, and are unlocked by defeating Imogen of its type, including a powerful mini-boss or even full-on real boss, to gather its essence. Then you craft them at the Imogen research facility in the city and upgrade them there too. A really cool system, a very satisfying way to have summons as part of your combat, and very fluid in the way that you could change which ones you were running very easily. Just like the class systems in play, it's really good in concept, simple and satisfying in its design, and would benefit massively for some real depth. More abilities, more variation, perhaps even more direct control over the Imogen who show up and disappear very quickly. It's just another system that Blue Protocol includes that is solid at its base original concept, but would be incredible with more depth. Now them dungeons, which play a key role in the game, functioning like a gauntlet that you must work your way through until the final boss at the end. Visually, solid. The two that I completed in the beta were very different in their vibe, one being a sort of earthy brown cave system, and then the other being a vibrant and green valley. But just like the players in the feedback, I did feel that it was very straightforward and a little too easy. It's difficult to complain about this for me personally though, because like look at World of Warcraft as an MMO example. None of the early game dungeons are particularly hard, obviously, but their mechanical design was much more interesting than heads into the next corridor out until the end boss area. So because of that, in their design I would like more use of the terrain. You know, the game lets you climb up and down areas, and out in the open world we saw lots of secret areas where you needed to do some parkour or platforming to access. Why weren't these in the dungeons? All those cool enemy and boss designs on top of the Imogen system was encouraging you to enter these dungeons for essence, but then when you went to them, they were a little bit straightforward and simple. In that player feedback, it was also said that the dungeons were difficult to navigate, which I so very much disagree. At best and most confusing, it was like, oh, I have a choice of going left or right. So say I go left and that's the wrong way. Well, then I kill some enemies, get some loot, turn around and then try the right path, and then that would be the correct way in the end. It really was that simple. So that feedback, I don't know about that, mate. Like I said, I'd love more 3D elements to the dungeons. Make use of that cool movement and ability to climb. More platforming would go a long way, alongside more difficult and interesting boss encounters, just like the feedback about world bosses. This game plans endgame raiding to be a main aspect of the game, so from what I've seen in those raid encounters that they tested in the beta, they do look incredible. I'm just wondering if they put all their time into endgame bosses and world bosses and not enough time into the dungeons. Definitely needs addressing, but it's an easy fix. That's a lot to think about, and I hope my perspective on all of that gives you a better idea of how it all works and what I think they need to do to address some of those issues with the systems. I obviously think they're cool, unique, or even clever mechanics, but they just need some depth to create longer lasting, satisfying experiences. Now let's talk about some of the new stuff we didn't see in this beta, but should see in the future. Blue Protocol currently runs with 4 main classes: the Aegis Fighter, the Twin Striker, the Blast Archer, and the Spellcaster. All of these provide a unique experience from one another, even if, say, one Blast Archer doesn't feel that different to another Blast Archer. Most of us expect the devs to release more classes than just these 4, and in the feedback post, they've confirmed they're actually already working on multiple, but they didn't give us any details on what these actually might be. On the bright side though, it's good to know they're not just planning on adding more, but they're already working on them. But with this, the players expressed the concern about class identity, and the devs actually agree with this. They're not ready to release new classes for, say, the next beta, because their primary goal right now is to fix the current classes, to make them feel more in-depth, more unique. When they're happy with the formula for class design, that's when I imagine we'll see new classes appearing. But they're already working on them, and I think this is a very healthy way to approach development of a game overall. They're not going to put out a lot of shallow garbage in the hopes that the amount of it distracts from the shallow nature of it. Quality over quantity has been the vibe I got from the Blue Protocol beta, and this aligns with that perfectly. We certainly should expect new abilities for each class and improvements on the current ones too, hopefully in the next beta. Then we have the mount system, which was really interesting in the first beta, where it worked as a massive sprint from a simple summon of a fox. You'd pull that fox out, hop on its back, and then you'd be able to run around at incredible speed, blasting around the place, but eventually it would run out and the mount would disappear, and then it'd go on cooldown for a reasonable period. I like this as a different way to approach mounted movement. Instead of just like a permanent slight increase, it was a super sprint. But because there was only that one fox mount possible in the beta, we only saw this one type of mounted movement. Apparently, there's going to be many types of mounts in the future, which should work differently from one another. They're hoping that the players will change mounts regularly while in the world, depending on what suits the situation they're currently in, which is really cool and something I've never seen in an MMORPG before. I could easily see like a frog style mount that jumps up and down for platforming, a more pack mule mount for longer traversal, even though it doesn't increase your speed massively, you get to sit on it for a lot longer. Maybe even a combat based mount. There's lots of potential with that idea, and I'm very excited to see what they do. But that's everything for the main feedback, and what I think was most important or interesting to address. You can definitely see the full post for all the details and feedback if you want it. And I think the way they addressed the feedback was really good, clearly taking public opinion very seriously and letting affect the state of the game and even its future development. The sheer length of this feedback address was incredible, down to the tiny details outside of the more important and major complaints too. And that makes me very hopeful, not only for the launch of Blue Protocol, but for its long-term life if the devs are going to approach feedback in this way. Obviously, sometimes players don't know what they want and over-communicate, and provide short-sighted feedback. So hopefully, the devs know when to stick to their guns long-term, alongside taking on board fair criticism. It would be very nice if we actually had word on when the next dev next stream is going to be, or even when the next beta was planned, even if it's not, say, specific dates, but like a timeline or something. But when we do know, or I have more information to talk to you about with Blue Protocol, you can be sure to expect it here on the channel soon after. What are your thoughts about their first feedback address? Did you think this was good? Are you hopeful for Blue Protocol? For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and I'll see you next time.